It's very exciting to be here. It's a real honor. There's something about talking in Iowa, talking in New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. You're very aware, as Sage was saying, you're very aware of the power that lies in your hands. And it's a privilege to be part of the process because it's very consequential. You know it, and I know it. You will be making a decision, not only in terms of the defeat of Donald Trump in the next election, but also in terms of the path forward for the United States of America. You have a lot of candidates, a lot of very good candidates. I don't think of myself as running against anyone. I think of myself as running with a lot of really good people. You're doing your due diligence by listening to everybody. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to tell you my vision and what I will do if you make me President of the United States. Sage was talking about the state of our country, the obvious state of tumult that we're in. But perhaps because I'm someone older, I've been around for longer, at that age where you're the sort of keeper of the stories, I have something to say to all of you that maybe isn't as clear to young people as it is to some older people. It wasn't all that fabulous before. Donald Trump did not create all of these problems. All of these problems created Donald Trump. And the slide away from democracy towards a corporate aristocracy is something that has been going on for 40 years. And all of us need to understand that, I believe, in order to best navigate the future. It's just like when you look up the history of your family, or you look up the history of your people, your religion, perhaps you're LGBTQ, or you're black, or you're Jewish, or as women we do this, what happened before? The more you have an understanding of what happened before, the more empowered you are in understanding where to stand in your time, in your life. You understand what you owe to your ancestors, and you come to understand what you owe to your descendants. I think one place, though, where all of us would do well to do a little more digging into our history to have a better understanding of where we are has to do with American history. I think, we want to remember you're LGBTQ and American. You're black and American. You're Jewish and American. We're all those things and American. And when it comes to a presidential campaign, I'm not talking to you as one tribal identity or another. I'm talking to you as an American. There is something about the American story, and the American story began in 1776. In 1776, some very brave men signed the Declaration of Independence, and in signing that, they were risking their lives. They were risking their lives because if, in fact, the British had won the war, they would have all been executed as traitors. And with the signing of that declaration, two extraordinary things happened. First of all, it was a complete and utter repudiation of an aristocratic system that had prevailed within Western civilization for centuries, in which only a few people were deemed entitled to own land, to actualize their dreams, to get educated, etc. And they were also positing that a society could exist in which, to the best of our ability, anyone would be allowed to soar. Anyone would be allowed to spread their wings. Anyone should be allowed to become whoever God would have them be. All are created equal. God gave all men inalienable rights of life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. Not only that, but the governments were instituted to secure those rights, and that any time the government was not doing that job, it would be the right of the people to alter it or abolish it. Extraordinary, radical, rambunctious, amazing, life-changing, earth-shattering. It was radical then, by the way, and it's still radical today. That's where the story began, but that's also where the story got gnarly. Because 41 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were themselves slave owners. So there is a characterological dichotomy, a kind of bipolarity that is built into the national American character. We're both. We are both and have always been in every generation, including our own. Both a country which is founded on the most aspirational and enlightened principles that have ever formed the core of a nation, and the most violent perpetrators of transgression against the principles on which we purport to stand. That's a lot, that's a big story. Now, as the story moves through time, every generation writes its own chapter. And we're at a time of kind of identity crisis of the United States, and it's time for our generation to decide what chapter we're going to write. Now, over time, we tend to course correct. We had slavery from the very, very beginning, but we ultimately responded to slavery with abolition. We had institutionalized suppression of women from the very beginning, but we ultimately responded to that with the suffragette movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. We had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South even after the Civil War. We responded to that with the Civil Rights Movement. Other generations before us have had stress and chaos. Other generations before us have had to deal with full-on assaults against the democratic pillars on which we stand. Other generations have stood up. Other generations have risen up. Other generations have pushed back. We're not going through anything other generations have not gone through, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. What has happened is that the United States has regressed. Because in the life of a nation, just like in the life of an individual, 2 steps forward is not a guarantee you will not be taking one back. The growth of a country, all that a country is a group of individuals. The same psychological and emotional and moral processes that we go through in our own lives, we go through collectively. So it's been 40 years now. Some of us in this room are old enough to remember. Now, I'm not glamorizing or whitewashing American capitalism before 1980, but there's some real big differences. Because starting in 1980, a very virulent strain of capitalism, and my critique is not of capitalism per se. This is not, for me, an anti-capitalist message. It's about capitalism with a conscience. Because what happened in the 1980s was a particularly virulent strain. And the virulent strain was trickle-down economic theory. The idea that all that a corporation owed was fiduciary responsibility to its own stockholders. And this was posited as good for America, because the idea was that as this stockholder and CEO class grew richer and richer and richer, they would drop crumbs from their aristocratic table in the form of job creation. And that would lift all boats. Now, I want to say something right here, because I think it's a little piece of history that everybody needs to be clear about. The man who was the main articulator of this theory, it came out of the University of Chicago, but the main articulator, who was a man named Milton Friedman, you know what he said? He said this will only be safe if we have a universal basic income. So you actually can't blame him, because he was talking about it within a context that actually was not offered to the American people. Rather, it was full-on trickle-down economics, the idea that corporations should be unfettered by any ethical or moral consideration, and it should be unregulated to the greatest extent possible, get government out of the way, which turned short-term profits for huge multinational corporate entities into the main organizing principle of American society. That was at the expense of democracy. Because what it posited then was that short-term profits for stockholders would be placed above, beyond, and before any ethical or moral consideration to the worker, to other people in the world, or to the planet itself. Now, this idea that this was going to lift all boats because of all the job creation that was going to rain down, we have now had 40 years, and I think after 40 years, you can consider the jury in. It has not lifted all boats. It has left millions and millions of people without even a life vest. It has destroyed America's middle class. It has created the greatest wealth inequality. We didn't even have this wealth inequality in the 1970s. And believe it or not, kids, there was a time, believe it or not, when the American corporation was actually expected to care. It was actually expected to care. If somebody had worked for decades for the corporation, the social agreement was such that, well, of course the corporation's going to care whether or not that person has a dignified retirement. I'm not saying we always got it right in America before the 1980s. We obviously didn't. But what I can say to you is that there was a consensus before that time that we were supposed to try. So what has happened is the largest wealth inequality, and we're now at a point where 1% of all Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. Now, this is not just hard data. This is human lives we're talking about. Now, for those of you who are students at the college, you will not be living the majority of your lives in the 20th century. You will be living the majority of your lives in the 21st century. Some of you were not even born in the 20th century. You should not live your lives at the effect of bad ideas left over from the 20th century. Now, American civilization is not the problem. The American people are not the problem. The American people are cool. I like the American people. I travel a lot internationally. I always feel it's cool to sit next to an American on an airplane. The problem is not the American people. The American people are generative and regenerative. We were born out of a hell yes. We were born out of a hell no to George. We were born out of a spirit of new beginnings. We have that. And you see that. You see that in business. You see it in science. You see it in health and wellness. You see it in religion and spirituality. You see it in education. You see it in relationships. You see it in sexuality. You see it in every area. Well, we did it that way then, but we're going to do it this way now. That's what's cool about American civilization. We got that. The problem is American politics never got that memo. So the one area of our societal functioning which is stuck, it's entrenched, this is how we do it, this is how we have done it, and don't even mention doing it differently, is politics. Now what has happened over the last 40 years is that so many people have just rolled their eyes and said, you know what, the change is not coming from politics. So whatever, I'll show up to vote in the midterms, I'll show up to vote in the presidential election and hope for the best, and maybe if there's one really exciting candidate, I'll get into it. But I'm not going to see politics as the place where real transformation happens. Well, that has become a perilous reality because the best thinking in America, the most generative thinking in America, the most regenerative thinking, the most creative thinking, the most new thinking in America, not only has not even been interested in an institution like that, but has had a very difficult time getting in, even when we try, because that system is so entrenched. What's happening now is what Sage pointed out. We can't ignore it anymore. It's too dangerous. We have been led to the verge of a precipice. We now are having to face the fact that if we do not turn around, we could go over a cliff. And to me, a second term for Donald Trump would be going over a cliff. But this is the deal, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else. We have to do more than not go over a cliff. We have to get out of the vicinity of the cliff. The traditional political establishment at this moment is the vicinity of the cliff, even if we don't go over the cliff. So if all we do is just make sure we defeat Donald Trump, which I certainly want us all to do, if that's all we do, then those same forces will be back in 2022, and they'll be back big time during the presidential election in 2024. We have to deal with the underlying problem. We have to deal with the underlying fact that we have been sliding away from democracy and into a corporate aristocracy for 40 years. This started in the 1980s. By the 1990s, the power that is given to these corporate entities to wield their influence through unlimited funds and sources of money has so corrupted our government. It's got a chokehold on the US government, and the government now, for all intents and purposes, does more to advocate for the short-term profits of these huge corporate entities than it does to advocate for us. We don't have reasonable health insurance. Why? Because of health insurance, not even health insurance, health care. Why? Because of health insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies. We don't have reasonable gun safety laws. Why? Because of gun manufacturers. We don't have healthy food the way we should because of food companies. We have a climate crisis. Why? Because of oil and gas companies. We have a war machine rather than any kind of peace creation technology that actually dominates our national security agenda. Why? Because of defense contractors. They are a matrix of corporate aristocracy. So what we need to do is we need to interrupt that pattern. We need to intervene, just like you would have an intervention with somebody who's a drug addict or somebody who's an alcoholic. And why? Think about the times that someone has called you or you have called someone else. And I say this because for the vast majority of Americans, we know what this phone call is. We know what the phone call is when somebody calls somebody else because someone that you loved, you saw them at a party, and you're really starting to think, we have to do something. And we all know what an intervention is about. An intervention is about the fact that we all realize that if you abuse your body enough, the survival of the body is not guaranteed. The American people need to wake up because the survival of our democracy is not guaranteed either. And the way we're treating our planet, the survival of our species is not guaranteed. We need to wake up, we need to stand up, we need to rise up. And that begins with an awakening that is not necessarily appreciated by the traditional political establishment because they are the sleeping pill. So we need to get real. We need to remember that the abolitionist movement did not come from the government, it came from the people. And the suffragette movement did not come from the government, it came from the people. And the civil rights movement did not come from the government, it came from the people. You know, right now, I just saw something on the internet, and some press person was describing me, and they said that I am chaotic good, and then they said Andrew Yang is chaotic neutral, and then they said Tulsi was chaotic evil, which I certainly don't agree with. My point is the outsiders are deemed chaotic. Now, in any other area, in business, in education, in anything, somebody comes in with a new idea, it's called creative, life-giving. New ideas, you got to get in there. Notice how the projection onto it is chaos. Why? Because to an entrenched political aristocracy, democracy is chaotic. There's no visceral taste there for democracy because you know what? Democracy is messy. Democracy means a lot of people are going to have a lot of good ideas and we're going to duke it out in a really positive way. So a lot of people's ideas should just clamp that down right now. That's how an aristocracy works. What we need to do is intervene. We need a fundamental pattern disruption. We need a pattern disruption of the economic and political and social trends that dominate our society. And so I'm going to tell you what I will do if you elect me president to make that happen. First of all, we need a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average American. We have millions of Americans who live with chronic economic anxiety. Millions. We have 93 million Americans who are near poverty. We have 13 million hungry children. We have 100,000 homeless children. This is all in the richest country in the world. We have so many millions of Americans who live with the daily tension of, I don't know what would happen if I got sick. I don't know what would happen if one of my children got sick. I don't know how I'm going to pay for my kids to go to college, or I don't know how I'm ever going to get out from under these college loans. You know, there's a big conversation now about how we're going to pay for mental health care. I have a great idea. Stop driving so many people nuts. So many people are living in a place of such tension and such anxiety because of all the things that I just mentioned. So we need to repeal that 2017 $2 trillion tax cut. $2 trillion. 83 cents of every dollar went to the very richest corporations and individuals. We need to repeal that tax cut. We need to put back in the middle class tax cut. We need to stop the corporate subsidies. $26 billion to oil and gas alone last year. We need to, the United States government needs to take back, thank you, its negotiating power so that it can negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies for lower drug prices. And we need to say to the US military, How much do you need? And every dollar that they say they need, they should get. And then the hundreds of billions of dollars above that, which have nothing to do with what the military says it needs and everything to do with short-term profits for defense contractors, we no longer spend. In addition to that, I do agree with Elizabeth Warren. I agree that we should have a 3% tax on the assets of billionaires, and we should have a 2% tax on the assets of those $50 million and more, and don't worry about it, they'll never feel it. This is the thing, ladies and gentlemen. We do all those things, guess what we're going to have? We're going to have some cash on hand. And let me tell you what we're going to do if I'm president with that cash. First of all, we need a season of repair. And it's got to begin with morality, public morality, not private morality. The government should have nothing to do with people's private morals. But there are public morals. Invading a country that didn't do anything to you, it's immoral. The way we treat the earth, it's immoral. The way we overturned a ban on pesticides that we know harm a developing child's brain, it's immoral. And mass incarceration, it's immoral. Racial disparity in criminal sentencing, it's immoral. Withholding the best education possible from any child for no other reason than that they didn't grow up in a rich neighborhood when you yourself are the richest country in the world is a passive form of oppression. It is immoral. So the first thing we do, and every American woman, I hope, that we need what Martin Luther King called a politics of conscience. And this is particularly something that I believe the American women must shout from the rooftops. First, you feed the babies. We talk about the patriarchy. We talk about how we need to rebalance feminine with masculine. There is nothing more feminine than, number one, first you feed the babies. And it can't just be your babies. It has to be babies on the other side of town and the other side of the world as well. And next you take care of your home. And our home is the earth itself. I want a United States Department of Children and Youth. Why? We have, as I said before, 13 million hungry children in the United States. We have millions of American children who go to elementary school and ask the teacher if maybe he or she has something for them to eat. We have elementary school children on suicide watch. We have children in America who are traumatized before preschool. We have children in America, and millions of them, who go to school in classrooms that sticks of paper, and in classrooms that do not even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. This is what should be seen as a national humanitarian emergency. We should be rescuing these children no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. So what has the political establishment done about these kids? Normalized their despair. Now, why is that? I'll tell you why. Because that virulent strain of capitalism has no use for children and has no use for old people, because neither one serves the system. And when the government is at the behest of those forces because of its money, children, hey, what are children? Children aren't old enough to vote. There's no constituency there. There's no donor class there. They're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage whatsoever. This is an example of what I mean. The people have to step in. Did you hear any talk on the debate stage about poverty? Did you hear any talk on the debate stage about homeless children or child poverty or child hunger? No, and you won't. This is exactly what I mean. If we are going to return any alignment of conscience to American politics, it's going to be the people who have to make it happen. And of course, they project onto anybody who's from outside that system that we're unqualified, because what we're not about, we're outside the box. Of course we're outside the box. The box is so putrid, it's the only place to be. Now, this is not about individuals, because like the other candidates for president are very lovely people. This is not about individuals. This is about a system. And it's interesting because everybody who's running for president is telling you the truth. This is not about people being liars. This is the issue, though. If you go into a court of law and you raise your hand, you don't just swear to tell the truth. You swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We need to do more than tell the truth to each other right now. We need to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And by the way, everything that's the whole truth and nothing but the truth, you already know. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. I'm just telling you things which are left out, very conveniently left out of the conversation that the traditional political establishment is having, and they are counting on our being so distracted or so gaslighted that we don't even question it. Next thing we have to look at is the fact that we need a World War II level mass mobilization in order to move from a dirty economy to a clean economy. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, we are facing, if we do not take radical action in the next 12 years, we could be facing a level of social collapse within 20 years unlike anything that we have seen in the modern era. If we do not make radical change and a just transition in terms of the climate crisis, we could be facing entire swaths of countries and even continents that are uninhabitable because of the heat, where food cannot be grown, and where there could be even up to hundreds of millions of climate refugees. We need a World War II mass mobilization, and one of the things I'd like to say to those of you who are students, I would not submit this as legislation, but I would ask for a referendum that to be voted on only by American citizens between the ages of 18 and 30. Because I'd like to submit to you, it will be your choice where you go with this referendum, but at the very least, it will be an important conversation. What I say to the young people of the United States is, we're in big trouble. And we have a politics of people-pleasing. We have a politics of pandering. We have a politics of telling you what people think you want to hear to vote for them, when deep in our hearts, what we really want is some honest truth spoken. The doctor has to tell you the truth if the test results didn't come in like you want, because if the doctor isn't honest with you about what the test results are, then how are you going to get so intelligent in the way you need to in order to create the solution? We can have the greatest era of American history ever. The 21st century can be amazing beyond anything that we have ever seen in this country, but only if we become radical truth tellers. We have to stop this way that the political system infantilizes us. If you have a friend in trouble, don't you get sophisticated and intelligent? If somebody comes into your room and says, she's really in trouble, we got to talk about this. Don't you get really sophisticated and intelligent really quickly? If somebody says to you, your parents are in trouble or your child is in trouble, don't we all get really sophisticated and really intelligent very quickly? So why aren't we being sophisticated and intelligent about politics? Rather, we've just handed the conversation over to somebody else who's basically not bringing their intelligence so much as they're bringing the same entrenched thinking and corporate control. So what I would like to say in a referendum to the young people of America, you can vote. Well, I won't be a voter because I'm 67, but the vote is this. I would like to submit the possibility of national service, 1 year. 1 year mandatory national service between the age of 18 and 26. And what I submit to you is that in order for us to make the kind of repair that we need it. If you want to be a teacher, we really need you in one of these rural schools for a year. If you want to be a doctor or a nurse, we really need you in one of these rural hospitals that are shutting down. If you want to be an architect, we really need you to help us with these infrastructure repairs. And we need all of you if we are going to turn around this huge ship in terms of greening America in time. The next thing I want to talk to you about is race. No country, any more than any individual, can have the future that we want if we're not willing to clean up the past. You got to clean it up. This is why Catholics go to confession. This is why the holiest day of the year in the Jewish religion is the day of Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. This is why in Alcoholics Anonymous, people have to take a fearless moral inventory and admit the exact nature of their character defects. The United States of America needs to take a serious moral inventory. This is why we need a president who is an integrative thinker rather than a 20th century thinker who thinks if we just tweak with the things on the outside, make external changes, tweak the pieces of the machine, that will be enough. That's not the 21st century. We need moral repair. Racism is our original character defect. I don't think the average American is a racist. That's not my experience or my belief. But I do believe the average American is woefully undereducated on the topic of race. So just very quickly, if we just go over the facts a little, so that we're all on the same page of what they are. The first slave ships arrived in North America in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Slavery was not abolished until 1865. That's almost 250 years. At that time, it is estimated that there were between 4 and 5 million emancipated slaves. Tecumseh Sherman, General Tecumseh Sherman promised at that time to every former slave family of 4, 40 acres and a mule. Federal troops were stationed in the South to ensure that slavery would not be reconstituted. And between 1865 and 1877, some pretty amazing things happened. There were black senators elected, black congressmen, etc. Once the federal troops left, all of those promises were rescinded, and white legislatures throughout the South passed what were called the Black Code laws to ensure subpar economic and social and political opportunities for black people. What followed then, after 250 years of slavery, except for those 12 years of Reconstruction, was another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people. That's 350 years. That's longer than our country has been in existence. What do you call lynchings if not domestic terrorism? What do you call Ku Klux Klan if not domestic terrorism? 100 years after the end of the Civil War, 1964, they passed the Civil Rights Act to dismantle segregation. The next year, 1965, the Voting Rights Act to allow and to ensure equal voting rights for black people. Even that, they started chipping away at that, the Supreme Court in 2013, which is why we have all these massive voter suppression efforts. In other ways, we're obviously sliding back, mass incarceration, racial disparity, and sentencing, et cetera. But most importantly for this conversation, we never closed the economic gap that obviously existed at the end of the Civil War. If you had been kicking people to the ground, and I think we'd all agree that 350 years of institutionalized violence is kicking people to the ground, you morally owe them 2 things. Number 1, stop kicking. Number 2, here, let me help you get back up. Now, Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II. Doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. And in 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the American Civil Liberties Act, where every surviving prisoner of the Japanese internment camps during World War II were given between $20,000 and $22,000. So I submit to you that it is time for us to pay reparations for slavery. It won't fix everything, but it is time to end an aberrational chapter in American history in a lot of areas and to begin a new one. The difference between race-based policies and reparations is the following. Race-based policies are good. Somebody wants to give billions of dollars to historical black colleges. That's good. Somebody wants to give billions of dollars to black home ownership, et cetera. All that's good, but it's the same paternalism that got us here. I mess with you. Now I'm going to tell you how I'm going to fix you. There is a mea culpa to reparations that race-based policies of themselves do not contain. It is an acknowledgement. It has spiritual influence, emotional influence, and psychological influence because it is an inherent acknowledgement of a wrong that has been done, a debt that is owed, and the willingness on the part of a people to pay that debt. My suggestion is $500 billion that would be paid over a period of 20 years. The money would be dispersed through a reparations council, obviously made of descendants of American slaves from a wide variety, academia, culture, business, and politics. And the money, the stipulation on the part of the US government is that the money would be used for purposes of economic and educational renewal. The one thing I want to add to that before I leave the is that this will be an economic stimulus. This will not be money taken away from the U.S. economy. This will be a stimulus of the U.S. economy. It was recently established that if black families created as much wealth as white families, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. We need to shift the entire economic paradigm in this country to the realization that everybody wins when everybody wins. You see, money does not come from a few corporate aristocrats, except for more corporate aristocrats. The way to create money in the United States is through the creativity and the productivity of the American people. And that is why I want every public policy, both domestically and internationally, to be built around one core principle: what would help people thrive. That's why I want the Department of Children and Youth. That's why I want a massive realignment of investment in the direction of children. It is immoral that we base our school funding primarily on property taxes. Every school in America should be a palace of learning and of culture and of the arts. If you want to see the entrepreneurial spirit that will give all of you guys, who are the young ones, the most amazing 21st century, the power to fuel that path is not in the wind, it's not in the sun, it's not in the ground, it's in the brain of every American child. Think of the millions and billions and possibly trillions of dollars that we will not realize in this country if we fail to educate the brain of every American child. And there's only one major pillar of a moral politics that I want to bring up, and then we can talk about anything you'd like to talk about, ask whatever you'd like to ask. And that is something I've referred to already, and that is our national security agenda. All it is endless preparation for war. That's really all it is. Endless preparation for war, killing who is a problem, and keeping other people from having nukes, which in certain cases we should try to keep them from having nukes, don't get me wrong. Although we should remember we have 7,000 of them. The military-industrial complex is what Eisenhower called it. You see, before World War II, we did not have a standing army. At the end of World War II, and remember, for those of you who are not that clear about this part of America's history, the supreme Allied commander, all Allied forces during World War II was Dwight Eisenhower. The war ended in 1945. In 1952, he became Republican President of the United States, and he was president from 52 to 60. He preceded John Kennedy. Now, if anybody understood the needs of the military, it was Dwight Eisenhower. We're talking the man led us through World War II. But he warned us at the end of his presidency, because even though we needed a standing army after World War II, and I'm not saying we don't need one, of course we need one, but he warned us of what he called the military-industrial complex. He warned us of what might happen if war became so good for business. To the point now where we have a military economy, we have a war economy. 53 cents of every dollar is in a defense-related industry. Even though this is not good for the economy, because the truth is you get more return for your investment when money is invested in infrastructure and in education. We are at a point now where we have a $760 billion military budget. We have a $40 billion State Department budget. Within the State Department, which is diplomacy and development and mediation, there is within that 40, $17 billion, which goes to the USAID. This is your money, by the way. The USAID is long-term development and humanitarian assistance. And then in addition to that $17 billion, also within the $40 billion for the State Department, is what's called the peace-building agencies. The peace builders are the experts at actually statistically creating the factors which increase peace and decrease violence. That means expanding economic opportunities for women, reducing violence against women, expanding educational opportunities for children, and ameliorating unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. See how much good common sense would do for us. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. What do you think is happening at the southern border today? Except that desperate people were trying to escape desperate situations in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. So for me, we should have a United States Department of Peace, because the peace-building agencies should be given equal support and resourcing as the military. I see the military as a surgeon. Does the United States need the best surgeon on hand in case we need surgery? Of course we should. But any sane person tries to avoid surgery. Sickness is the absence of health. Health is not the absence of sickness. And war is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. We need the equivalent of the health and wellness space applied to the issue of the health and wellness of our society and our planet. That's why I want the Secretary of the USAID to be an equal partner when we're having those national security meetings. We should not only be talking to the military, not only to people who see national security through the agenda and through the lens of that kind of geopolitics, but also the lens of what it would take to actively wage and declare peace in this world. Now, all of the things that I have mentioned to you today sound to some outlandish, which should tell you what trouble we're in. Because everything I said to you is just common sense. I don't know, you feed the kids. I don't know, you save the planet from total destruction. I don't know, you pay your debts, your historical debts, and oh, I don't know, you try to create peace. This should tell you how divergent the consciousness, the will, the common sense, the dignity, and the goodness of the American people, how divergent the consciousness of the American people is right now from the basic organizing principle of the US political establishment. And like I said, that will not change unless we change it. A lot more people love than hate in this country, but the haters have become active, the haters have become politicized, and the haters are convicted. The racists and the bigots and the homophobes and the anti-Semites. But there are a lot more lovers than haters. But collectivized hatred is a very, very dangerous thing. And I'm not saying that our government is run by such people. I'm not. But I am saying that no less powerful a person than the President of the United States is not above exploiting and harnessing those things for his political purposes. There is only one power that can override collectivized fear. There is only one power that can override any assault on democracy. There is only one power that can override any threat to that which is good and true and ultimately life-producing for the people of the United States and the planet on which we live. And that is if enough of us wake up and vote. If enough of us awaken from the illusion that we have to do things the way we did them before. Those of you who are young, no, you don't. You don't have to do things the way they were done in the 20th century. This is what it is to grow up. This is what everybody in your 20s is going through. You take a good look at your parents. Where did they do it right? Because where they did it right, I want to do it even better. And where did they do it wrong? Because where they did it wrong, we're going to break the chain right now. And I'm not going to hand to the neuroses that my parents handed to me. A society matures as well. And like I said, you who are young, but actually those of us who aren't young, we do not deserve to be at the effect or to be burdened by the illusions of the 20th century, particularly since the economic and political illusions of the 20th century have brought us to the brink of disaster. Now, Winston Churchill once said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after we have exhausted every other option. The whole world knew what he was talking about because sometimes the Americans are slow to wake up. We are sometimes slow to wake up. But when we do wake up, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, we slam it like nobody's business. It is the 11th hour, but it is not midnight yet. We must not tarry, however. This is not a time to think, well, we'll just elevate the conversation. Donald Trump, I'm sorry to say, is not above putting out some really big lies. Some really outrageous lies. The only way we're going to beat that is with some outrageous truths. He has produced political theater, and we will not be going back. He is a phenomenon, and we need a phenomenon of our own. And that phenomenon will not be same old, same old. That's just not going to do it. What we need is the phenomenon of awakening among the American people. So great that there is no narcissist, no incumbent, no Russian interference, and no corporate money that can stand before the will of the American people when we say enough is enough. Hell no to that. We're going another way. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.